Hello, this is Michele via ten Sorbet, and this is a new episode of Wojennik TV. Darkness is a motif which very often is used both in war games, as in literature, and even in movies. We very often have this dark theme in which the forces of the good are fighting the forces of the evil, who tries to control the entire world and to make it fall into darkness. So this is a theme which is quite often used. And today, a game in which darkness will also have its own unique space, because it will be one of the major themes in the game. The game itself is called Darkness, and it was published in 2018 by Meadow Games. Darkness is a strategy card game of ancient mysticism, because each player will take control or will become a mystic traveling through the world and with his own animal spirit assets trying to gather artifacts and relics and become the most powerful mystic among them all. The game was published thanks to Kickstarter. The campaign was launched with an objective of $8,000, and finally it closed with almost $15,000. What deserves to be mentioned is the number of people who backed this project, because although the amount gathered, 15,000, is not extremely high, the project was backed by more than 600 people. This is due to the fact that Darkness is a mini game. It is closed in a small but extremely elegant box. I have showed you this box during a previous unboxing of the game, and this is a quick playing card game. The game is for players aged 10 or higher. It's for 2 to 5 players, and the time of play, as I said earlier, extremely short. It will take us about 30-45 minutes to play an entire game. Today I would like to show you this game. I would like to explain how it works, and at the end I would like to tell you what I think about this game, what I believe are its strong and also a little weaker points. I said that this game was published by Meadow Games. It was designed by Taylor Hayward. This is, as I said earlier, a card game, so we'll be using cards during this game. We have 3 types of cards. I'll show you them right now. Here is Darkness, prepared to play a 3 players game. As you can see, we have several types of cards which will be used. Firstly, we'll have the artifacts cards, which will be important in terms of game scoring. We'll have the relic cards, which will grant us some special capabilities and also sometimes some points. And finally, we have the animal spirit cards, which will be in possession of each player. Each player will have a set of 15 such cards in 5 different colors: orange, yellow, green, red and blue. Now, the objective of this game is to score the maximum possible number of points, and at the end of the game, which ends after 6 rounds of play, we compare the number of points scored. Those points can be scored for 2 things. Firstly, we can score points for relic cards if they are gems. Each gem is worth 3 points, and each such card will grant you 3 points at the game's end. Secondly, we will gain points for artifact cards based on the number of the same type of card collected, because we have several types of cards. We have, for instance, obelisks, we have altars, we have henges, we have idols, and at the game's end we check the number of each type of those cards that we have, and based on the number of such cards we score a certain number of points. Of course, as you might expect, the number of points increases with the increase of the number of cards that you have of the same type. So for instance, for 4 altars you'll get only 7 points, but if you accumulate 7 of them you'll score 22. The maximum possible is 12 cards, which will grant you a whopping 67 points. The game, as I said earlier, ends after round 6. The game is always prepared in such a way that we prepare a certain number of artifact stacks. In each stack we have always 6 cards, so during each round we'll be using only the top card of each stack. The number of stacks depends on the number of players. Here in a 3 players game we'll have 9 stacks composed of 6 cards each. We prepare also some relic cards because we have 2 types of cards. As I said earlier, we have artifact cards and relic cards. We always have 4 relics which are available to claim at the end of each round. Now, how a round of darkness looks. Each player will choose from their animal spirit cards a set of 3 different cards. He can choose, for instance, 3 orange ones, he can choose 2 yellow and a green, or maybe 1 card from 3 different colors. He chooses those cards without showing them to his or her opponents, and he places those cards face down in front of him. When each player is ready, so when each player already had chosen 3 cards from their reserve, each player uncovers the cards and places them in front of him in his playing area. So, for instance, we can imagine that players have chosen to place those types of cards in front of them. And the third player, for instance, 1 blue, 1 yellow and 1 red. Now those colors are important because those colors are connected to the colors printed on the artifact cards and on the relic cards. As you can see, each artifact card has 2 colors printed on it, a primary color and a secondary color. Because at the end of each round, we will check which player has the biggest number of each color, and he will be able to claim all the artifacts which have this color as their primary color. So for instance, this idol will go to the player who places the biggest number of red cards. In case of a tie, we check the secondary color. So in this example, the secondary color would be yellow. If the round ended right now, the red would be tied between 2 players. So we would look at the yellow color, which is the secondary color, and this card would be granted to the player who has played 2 yellow and 1 red card. We check each and every card in the playing area, but not now, only at the end of the round, because this is the first phase of the round and the round is played in 3 phases. During the second round, each player will choose 2 cards from their reserve, knowing what cards were placed earlier during phase 1. So for instance, I can choose 2 orange cards, and again those cards will be placed face down, and when all players are ready, they will be uncovered and added to the cards played during the first phase. So after the second phase, each player will have 5 face-up cards in front of him, and those cards will be used in order to determine who gets what at the end of the round. The third phase is a phase during which each player will have the possibility to add 1 more card in the same way without showing this card to their opponents. So for instance, I can add a third orange card to my set, whereas the other players can choose, for instance, they can choose a green card, or rather a blue card here, and here, for instance, a red card would be added. And that would end phase 3, which would lead us to the final phase of the round. Now we would verify each and every card in the circle in terms of who has the biggest number of cards of the primary color. So for instance, this obelisk would go to the player to the right because he has 2 green cards, the player at the bottom has none, and the player to the left has only 1. So this artifact would go to this player. Then we have this card, which would go also to this player because he has 3 blue cards. Then we have this card with red, which would go to the player to the left, again to the player to the left because this is a card which has red again. Those 3 have yellow as the primary color, so they would all become part of the collection of the player to the bottom. Finally, we have also some darkness cards which are part of the circle. We check if any player placed cards corresponding to the cards presented on such a card. And we see that the player to the right placed 3 blue cards and 1 orange, so he would dispel this black card. He would place it outside of the playing area. But if a darkness card is not dispelled by any player, this card is added to the veil, which is another part of the playing area. The veil has place for 3 darkness cards, and at the moment when a 3rd darkness card is added to the veil, bad things happen, because at that point each player will have to discard artifact cards from their collection. They will have to discard cards until they have the same number as the player with the fewest artifacts. So for instance, if one player has only 7 artifact cards, the second has 8 and the third has 12, the player who has 7 artifacts he doesn't discard anything. The second player who has 8 artifact cards will have to discard 1 card in order to drop his number to 7. And finally, the last player who has 12 artifact cards has to discard 5 of them in order to drop to 7. So darkness cards, even though they do not grant points at the game's end, can be very important in order to avoid discarding artifact cards, which grant points at the game's end. Darkness cards, furthermore, are a tiebreaker, because in case of a tie, it's the player who dispelled the biggest number of darkness cards who wins. After collecting all those artifact cards, we verify also the relic cards, and if any player managed to place all the cards indicated on such a card, he can claim those relics, adding them to their collection. Now, those relics can grant us points, if they are gems, or they can grant us special abilities. Those relics are of one-time use, and we can play such a relic during a turn. After ending all this, so after resolving the artifacts, after claiming artifacts, after resolving the relics, after verifying also potential darkness cards, we end the round. Each player takes back his animal spirit cards. He can use them during the next round. We uncover cards in the playing area in order to show new potential artifacts or darkness cards, which will be the target of the rivalry between players during the following round. We add new relics if any were claimed during the previous round, and we play a new round. If this is round 5, we discard all the different relics apart from gems. We search for gems which are still inside the deck, and we place them. Also, more gems will be available during round 6. If round 6 ends, we pass to the final scoring, where we count gems and where we verify our sets. So for instance, after round 1, I will have only 3 points because I have 3 different cards. If I had at the end of round 1 also, for instance, 1 additional altar, that would grant me additional points, because I would also already have 2 altars. Well, 2 altars are still worth 2 points, but if I manage to take a 3rd one, those 3 cards will grant me 4 points. So the number of points will increase with each additional altar that I add to my collection. And that is pretty it when it comes to the rules, when it comes to the objective and the gameplay of Darkness. Now, I'd like to share with you my thoughts after playing this game several times. I'd like to tell you what I think are the strong and also the weaker points of this title. Darkness is a game which attracted my attention because it was something with very interesting mechanics, and at the same time which was supposed to be extremely pretty, extremely functional, and with some small twists in the mechanics. I must say that Darkness is a very pretty game. It is a high quality design in the terms of what we receive in this small and extremely elegant box. I believe it's very original, it is very pretty, and inside the box we not only find some very well designed, very functional cards of good quality, but also a surprise envelope inside of which we have one additional special card. I always enjoy games in which we have hidden components, in which we can discover something unique, and Darkness has this small addition which really adds some additional value to this game. Looking for strong points of this title, the first one would be, as I said a few moments ago, the quality of the components. It is a high quality component game. One small issue concerns the back of the cards, because there are some color differences between cards which are supposed to be the cards of the same mystic. So if you are playing this game very often, if you are playing this game competitively, then after some plays you'll be able to guess what color, what type of card your opponent is choosing during his round. It's not very obvious, those differences are not very big, but if somebody really plays this game very often, he is sometimes capable of telling if the card is, for instance, an orange card or a red card. So some small differences are here. It deserves to be mentioned, but this is not a big issue, because I don't believe Darkness will be played competitively. I don't believe it will be played so heavily to impact, to influence this element, to make this element important in terms of gameplay. The second thing which I really like in this game is the fact that you have this interesting mechanic when it comes to placing your cards, because this is done in three distinctive phases. In phase 1 you'll choose 3 cards, in phase 2 you'll choose 2 of them, and in phase 3 you'll choose your final 6th card. So I like the fact that after placing your first 3 cards, you'll have 2 decision-making moments when you'll have to decide if you stick to your original plan and decide, for instance, to add additional cards, enabling you to acquire some artifacts or maybe to dispel some darkness cards, or seeing what your opponents had already placed, you change your plan. But here is the twist. When you see that your opponents, for instance, placed the same cards that you did, you might fall into a trap, because if you change your plan, your opponents can do the same. So this is a small psychological game in which you will try to bluff, or you will try to guess what your opponent will do in his next move. Because if you think that changing your plan will enable you to score some additional points, you're not sure that you'll be able to do it, because your opponent can have exactly the same idea. Sometimes sticking to your initial plan is the best option, because your opponent changes his plan, enabling you to accomplish your first objectives. So this is not obvious, and I like games in which this small psychological aspect, the bluff aspect, is present. The third thing is that this game is quite quick to explain, quite quick to play, and at the same time it is possible to play it in a group from 2 to 5 persons. There are many card games, many short games, which work only up to 4 players. Here in Darkness you have this option to play a 5-player game, and I always like such games, because my gaming group sometimes is comprised of 5 or even 6 persons. So having this game in my collection enables me to play it when we have a bigger group of players. The third thing which I like is the fact that in this game you have three different layers, in fact, because placing your animal spirit cards will enable you to compete for artifact cards, relic cards, and finally for darkness cards. And those are 3 very different elements. Of course, the most important one, which will grant you the biggest number of points, are the artifact cards. So you'll try to focus on gathering the most possible amount of cards, and possibly of card types which suit those that you already have in your collection in order to collect more cards of the same type, because this is the way how you will score the most points. But this is not so easy, because your opponents will also see what you're trying to collect. And this is a game in which not only you will try to increase your own score, sometimes you'll try also to forbid other players or deny them some assets. You'll try to deny them taking those precious torches if they have already some in their collection. So this is a game in which you'll be trying not only to increase your own score, you'll also sometimes try to hinder the opponent's moves. Secondly, you have the relic cards, because placing your animal spirit cards will enable you also to acquire relic cards, and those are pretty powerful. Not only you can score additional points thanks to gems, secondly you have some special cards which, for instance, enable you to place cards face down so that your opponents do not know what you choose. You can swap cards, you can play one additional card, so those are extremely powerful things, but I don't believe they are so strong that you'll be trying to play only to gather relic cards, because frankly speaking, it's the artifact cards which are absolutely crucial in this game, and you should focus strictly on them. Relic cards will be nice additions. Thirdly, you have those darkness cards. Those darkness cards which are a great danger to some players and at the same time a great opportunity to others, because darkness cards are somewhat of not only a tiebreaker when it comes to final scoring, they are also a leveler, because at some point some players will have more artifact cards than others, and when looking at the cards which are disponible during the current round, if we see some darkness cards and we see that if we don't dispel them, darkness will engulf the world and you'll have to discard artifact cards, someone will have to take care of them. And now this is another interesting aspect, because if you have the fewest number of artifact cards, you have absolutely no interest in dispelling darkness. In contrary, you'll try to make darkness happen in order to other players discard some additional cards. If you're in the middle, you'll be observing what happens. If you have the most number of artifact cards, you'll be the one most interested in trying to dispel darkness. So sometimes you'll have to decide, do I want to dispel darkness or do I want to gather other artifacts? Is someone else interested in dispelling darkness? If, for instance, I have 13 cards and my following opponent has 12, will he try to dispel darkness or will he let it go and will we have to discard cards? So some nice decisions also are due to this element. And this is another layer of the game, because you'll again have to focus not only on artifact cards but also on relic cards and also on darkness cards, and trying to take all of them during one and only round is extremely difficult with only 6 cards played. So a lot of decisions, a lot of interesting interaction both between the 3 types of cards and between players due to those different connections. So what I think are the weaker points of darkness? I have already said a few words about the backs of the cards, but this is a small issue. What I think is a weaker point of this game is a big disconnection between the theme and the game itself and the mechanics, because in this game we have a theme proposed by the author which is, in my opinion, too abstract to really make people feel it, because in my personal opinion this theme is so abstract and so disconnected to the way that the game works that it's hard to feel like a mystic and to use animal spirit cards. It's in the rules, it's somewhere described in the rule book, but in fact this is a set collection game, and trying to make it something more, deep, in my opinion, was not successful in this case. Another thing is that this game tends to be random because you have a random distribution of artifacts, of relics, sometimes even planning ahead or trying to do your best with the cards that you place will not grant you benefits, because your opponent can place the same cards even with this small psychological game due to bluff or due to his own strategy or his own idea. So sometimes randomness will be an important factor of the game. This randomness increases if you have more players. But at the same time, this is a very short, very simple game, which is extremely pleasant in my opinion, because it has really a lot of decisions to take during the game. So concluding, Darkness is an interesting game, a very pretty game with a very short time to play, which works well both in a group of 2, 3, 4 or 5 players, so it scales quite good. It's a game with an abstract theme which is quite disconnected to the mechanics, but at the same time a game really interesting because it has some different layers. It has an interesting mechanic of placing your cards in 3 different distinctive phases, and it is also a game with, as I said, some decisions to make, because you will have to concentrate both on acquiring points, on trying to hinder your opponent, to avoiding darkness, to gathering relics. There's a lot of things going on among those cards that you receive. So Darkness is a game which might suit you. You can try it. This is a game which in terms of short, interesting games, really stands out. I will definitely keep in my collection, and I will play it from time to time. This was the review of Darkness, published by Green Meadow Games. Thank you a lot for watching this review. I invite you to take a look at our other videos, take also a look at our Facebook and Instagram accounts. And if you like what we are doing here at Wojennik TV, you can also become our patron. Take a look at our Patronite account. You'll find the link in the description of this movie. Have a terrific day and see you next time.